It's really hard to watch a train go off the rails, but it's worse to watch one go entirely off of a cliff. And that's what's going on here as Adherent Apologetics tries once again and fails once again to show that I was wrong in my response to one of his videos. I think we've kind of bypassed sadly ironic, and we're now into genuine condolence for his irrationality. It's really hard to explain this any other way. So let's go take a look. We're back once again with Zach from Adherent Apologetics as he tries and ultimately fails to say anything intelligent with regards to my response to his 36 questions for atheist videos. This is the fourth time that we've been through it, and he's still regurgitating the exact same things that have been disproven before. He's still wrong, and he has no idea why that is. So, maybe I just have to talk slower. I don't know. Anyhow, I think he gets through one, maybe two clips of my response, and honestly, I think he's running out of things to say. But so long as he keeps going, I'll keep pointing out just how laughable it all is. So, take it away, Zach.
So this video is part 4 of my response to a YouTube atheist. I released a video a few months ago called 36 Questions to Ask Atheists, and he responded to those questions.
Yes, I did. However, it seems that since then, he stopped paying any attention whatsoever to my responses, or, let's be honest, anyone's responses, when it's pointed out just how far off base he actually is. Now, I never intended for this to become a war of video responses, but Zach refuses to engage with his detractors in his own comment section, so this is really the only way to put the message out there. So I guess the real question is, how far off the rails is he going to go this time? Let's find out.
So this is part 4 of me responding to his answers. If you haven't seen the other 3 videos, I highly encourage you to check them out. The link to the playlist is in the description.
Yes, absolutely. And while you're doing it, make sure you check out my responses to his objections. I know he doesn't like it, but I'm pointing out everywhere that he goes wrong, and he goes wrong a lot. So, as with every single one of these responseception videos, all older material is going to be in black and white, just to keep it clear. So, let's get going.
But let's get it going.
What evidence is there that atheism corresponds with reality?
Atheism is a reaction to religion. There is no evidence whatsoever for any gods, thus not believing in any gods is the only rational position that one can take. Until objective evidence can be demonstrated for any god, atheism will remain the only rational position available. But as I've pointed out many times before, far too many theists look at atheists like we're just like they are, emotionally held beliefs clung to the exclusion of all else, blind faith in something that cannot be rationally justified because fee-fees. And that's not how it works.
By saying that there's no evidence for God and atheism is the only rational position, he makes himself look really good for his listeners.
But that's not why it's done. See, if you had any actual evidence to present, Zach, then you could easily prove me wrong. Go ahead. Please present objective evidence that your God, your specific God, actually exists in the real world. Because that's what we've been asking for, and your side simply cannot provide. This would be a really quick debate if the religious had anything intelligent to present, but because they don't, and it's such a big deal that they can't. Instead, it turns into a childish game of, I know you are, but what am I? They are big on claiming to have evidence, but they're absolutely horrible at actually presenting any. Here's exactly what we mean when we say that we want evidence. We want objective evidence, and this is defined as information based on facts that can be proved by means of search, like analysis, measurement, and observation. One can examine and evaluate objective evidence without having to believe in it first. And they just stand there like they don't understand that their emperor is buck naked. You have to do a whole lot better than you do, Zach. Now show us what you've got.
However, there are a lot of good reasons to believe that God exists.
But that's not evidence. We are asking for evidence. We are not asking for your rationalizations. This goes back to something that I've said previously. We are not like you. We are not looking for anything emotionally comforting to grab onto and never let go of. We are only concerned with the facts, demonstrable, verifiable, objectively testable facts. The religious are simply lacking that. It's why they claim to have evidence, and then they present things that simply do not qualify. And here's another thing. Everything that they say, none of it actually points to their particular deity. It's just a vague claim made without evidence that they can wrangle around in their heads to mean their deity, but which can be used for any god or really for anything. This is exactly what happens when you act irrationally. They start with a conclusion, the idea that there is a god and their particular god, adopted for emotional reasons, and then they start looking for reasons to justify that belief. It's just a giant game of confirmation bias. Come on, play along. It's really not that hard to see.
If you don't believe me, just look at cosmology, near-death experiences, morality, miracles, beauty, purpose, and many other areas in which there are strong reasons to believe that a creator does in fact exist.
And there you go. No evidence, just a bunch of bald claims, none of which point directly to Zach's particular God by his own admission. They point to a creator, his word, but the simple fact is they don't actually point to anything. He already believes in a God, one God in particular, so everything starts to look like, well, God did it, because that's the destination he desperately wants to reach. Now, I've already taken out all of those claims in the past, so I'm not going to waste anyone's time doing it again. If you have questions, by all means, ask in the comments because, unlike Zach, I actually answer. This is yet another place where he's not at all interested in what's being asked for. He isn't capable of providing any actual evidence. He's just running through the laundry list of bald rationalizations that have been drummed into his head by his religion. And as I said before, you can apply these so-called reasons to anything. They prove, for instance, that invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies are real. They are proof for anything, so long as you don't think about it too hard. But we're not asking for proof of anything. We're asking about his specific God. And that's something he just can't provide.
Theism is definitely rational.
No, it's not. So let's look at that for a moment. Rational, by definition, means based on or in accordance with reason or logic. Theism is not that. But the religious, they don't read too closely. They think that so long as they can come up with reasons, emotionally derived, intellectually vapid reasons to believe, meaning anything that they can personally, subjectively invent that justifies their own beliefs in their own heads, well, that's all it takes to be rational. And they're wrong. Because once again, we can go back to the simple fact that absolutely anyone can justify absolutely any position that way, and that does away with the whole concept of rationality. If it invariably can be used to demonstrate anything, then it ultimately demonstrates nothing. But people like Zach, they don't care. This isn't about finding the truth. It's about justifying their feelings. They really like the idea of a magical father figure in the sky, so because they have convinced themselves that it has to be real, that their special, individual magic man has to be the only one out there, then absolutely everything can be used to justify that belief. That's why they are engaged in rationalizations and not being rational. Now, just to remind people, a rationalization is the action of attempting to explain or justify behavior or an attitude with logical reasons, even if these are not appropriate. And that's exactly what Zach is doing.
He says that theists are just emotionally driven and that they don't care about the evidence, yada, yada, yada. We've all heard this before.
Yet you keep falling right into that trap. You're certainly not alone in that because there are a lot of people who do the exact same thing, but they are just as irrational as you are. People who are looking for ghosts and alien abductions and Bigfoot, they're all doing the exact same thing that the religious are doing. They are starting with a conclusion, an intellectually unjustifiable conclusion, and then they're trying desperately to backfill in evidence to support their beliefs, at least in their own minds. They are so deluded that they can't even see what they are doing. But everybody else can. We point it out, and instead of actually coming up with strong, defensible evidence to support the things that they believe, the religious just keep repeating the same old, tired, entirely debunked ideas that got them nowhere in the first place. Zach isn't doing any better.
Sure, there are some theists who are emotionally driven and do not care about the evidence.
Like you. Just saying. Because if you did care about the evidence, then you'd actually have some. This is why it is so important not to put the cart before the horse, as the religious do. They start with faith, and then they look for anything that supports it, conveniently ignoring all of the stuff that doesn't, so that they can pretend that they were right all along. And that is not a rational means of looking at the world. You have to start with the evidence and then go with whatever it supports without actually caring how you feel about that conclusion. Your feelings don't matter to reality. Reality is what it is. But that's not what Zach is doing. It isn't what any theist is doing. They are all doing rationality entirely wrong.
But there are also atheists who are emotionally driven. A generalization fallacy occurs when you say that since some theists are irrational, then all theists are irrational.
It isn't a generalization, it's a demonstrable fact. Now, we've already looked at the definition of rationality, and no theistic belief qualifies. Now, that's not to say that they couldn't. Bobo the tree god used to live in my backyard. I had objectively verifiable evidence that he was there. I didn't have to rely on stories written in ancient books of mythology. I didn't have to rely on empty claims or hysterical emotional diatribes. I had absolute proof. But that doesn't mean that Bobo was a god. I only proved that Bobo was a tree. To get to the god part, I've got a whole other layer of responsibility that I not only have to define the godlike qualities of Bobo, but I have to demonstrate that he actually has those qualities. And that's silly. Yet theists like Zach here, they haven't even conquered the first part of the challenge. They haven't proven that the God that they believe in is actually real. Never mind any of the things that they claim about him. Therefore, they are operating on an inherently irrational level. Come on, this really isn't that hard to figure out.
Anyone who has ever been friends with a theist or looked seriously into theist works knows that all theists are not just emotional people who do not care about the evidence.
And as a former theist, as well as someone who knows and has known many, many, many theists over my considerable lifespan, you're just wrong. In fact, if you start asking former theists, you will find out that the reason they typically give for rejecting religion is the utter lack of evidence that supports it. They went into it believing that the evidence would defend their Christian or whatever views, and came out the other side realizing that the evidence in and of itself does nothing of the sort. The fastest way out of Christianity is examining Christianity critically and actually caring where the evidence leads. Because if you're honest with yourself, it doesn't lead to the Christian God, or any other God for that matter. It's all a bunch of made-up nonsense.
Is atheism a worldview?
Nope. It's a reaction to religion, as I said before. If religion ceased to exist, so would atheism, or at least the need to call ourselves atheists. If you want to know why atheists exist, look in the mirror. It's your fault. There is no worldview to atheism, and the whole idea of a worldview itself is asinine in the first place.
All I want to add to this question is that he fits under the general beliefs of a new atheist.
I'm not a new atheist. I know that the religious love to stamp that label on people, but I've been an atheist for damn near 40 years. There's nothing new about my atheism or about atheism in general. The thing that pisses a lot of theists off these days is the fact that they can't make us shut up. They've lost their political and social power. That's what really upsets them.
Where all they do is, quote, lack a belief in God.
And that's all atheists have ever done. You can go back thousands of years and see this in the writings of ancient atheists. Xenophanes, back in the 6th century BCE, wrote, "If cows and horses had hands, then horses would draw their forms of their gods like horses, and cows like cows." Euripides wrote in his play Bellerophon, "Doth someone say that there be gods above? There are not, no, there are not. Let no fool, led by the old false fable, thus deceive you." But the religious have, as is no surprise, met such ideas not only with hatred, but violence. Diagoras of Melos, a Greek poet, was sentenced to death in Athens for being a godless person, but somehow managed to escape the city. Anaxagoras was the first atheist exiled under the decree of Deopethes, a law in ancient Greece outlawing atheism. The list of horrors visited upon the non-religious by the Abrahamic religions, that would be a video in and of itself. This is what happens when you allow the delusional to achieve power.
This helps us better understand his view as we go into this next question.
If not, what is your worldview?
Rationality. Following the evidence to see where it leads, not forcing an overarching concept of reality that I expect reality to conform to. Rather, what I accept must conform to reality as it is, not as I might want it to be. Like I said, worldviews are idiotic.
A lot of people that you interact with will say that they will follow the evidence wherever it leads.
You say the exact same thing. In fact, you did so in one of your previous videos. But it's one thing to say that you'll do it, and another thing entirely to actually do so. Because here's the thing about following the evidence. It starts with the evidence itself. It doesn't start with a conclusion that you want to reach. That's the difference between reason and rationalization. Reason has no destination in mind. Rationalization does. Reason doesn't care what the truth is. It only wants to find it. Rationalization is seeking emotional comfort first and foremost, and those things that do not provide it, those are rejected out of hand. One of us engages in reason, the other engages in rationalization. I will leave it up to the viewers of this video to decide which is which.
But the people who say this aren't just atheists. There's also some Christians or Muslims or agnostics or Jews who say that they are willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads.
They say it, but do they do it? That's the question that matters. This is something that you will discover if you debate the religious, that if you back them into a corner where you will not accept their faith as an answer, where they actually have to back up their claims with actual evidence, every single one of them will abandon reason and run right back to blind belief, because ultimately that's what they care about. Not the evidence, not the facts, the belief. Were you to do that with a rational person, where granted they wouldn't have faith to begin with, but if you did, you know what they'd do? They'd change their mind. The religious don't do that because the religious aren't concerned with reality. Their belief in their gods overpowers any supposed desire to find the truth. Seriously, try it out. You'll see.
But they've led to different conclusions.
But are they rationally defensible conclusions? Because that's important. Are these things intellectually derived, or do they arise from the emotions? And I submit to you that the religious, and they're not the only group that does this certainly, but the religious act from emotion, not intellect. If you ask a theist what it would take to reject their belief in their God, most of them would say it will never happen. But ask an atheist, and they're going to say evidence. Not too long ago, Bill Nye and Ken Ham had a debate where that exact thing came up, and it played out exactly as I said. Take a look.
Popular Science magazine, the September 2014 edition, features a cover story with Bill Nye the Science Guy on the cover, and inside there's a lengthy article, an interview with Bill Nye, and a good chunk of that is devoted to his debate with you last February at the Creation Museum. The article points out that Nye had a response to a question presented at the debate: what might change his mind? Nye said we would need just one piece of evidence. Now the article quotes you as saying during the debate, you know what, I'm a Christian, I know God's word is true, and there's nothing he could say that will cast doubt on that.
Just because you believe the evidence points a certain way doesn't mean that everyone who disagrees with you is just biased.
No, the evidence leads where the evidence leads. I just keep pointing out where the religious actually are biased, though. There's no question that it happens. Now, I'm not going to say that there's no chance that anyone out there couldn't be unbiased. I can only say that I've never met one, and I don't think for a second that I'm talking to one now. If I were, all of the places where I and others have pointed out that you're wrong, you would have changed your tune. You wouldn't just keep repeating the same disproven crap. The fact that you haven't, that you're just repeating the same old tired apologetic nonsense now that you were when all of this started, it just shows that you're not really concerned with reality.
If you believe that, that's probably a good sign that you are the one that's biased.
Ah yes, run around with the goalposts. Glad to know that you're so predictable, Zach.
Probably the most troubling thing I've heard so far in these responses is when he says that worldviews are idiotic.
And they are. Let me explain. By definition, a worldview is a particular philosophy of life or conception of the world. Typically, it is something that you overlay onto reality itself, a lens through which you interpret your objective observations to fit into a particular view, especially an emotionally comforting view. We can take Christianity, for instance, although any religion will do. It is a means for the faithful to identify a common thread throughout objective reality, whether that common thread actually exists or not. Worldviews provide a rigid ideological measuring stick which cannot be doubted or questioned once it is in place. That's why worldviews are, in general, stupid. When you start with an unassailable framework that there is a God, you cannot ever come to the conclusion that there isn't one. Now, we can look at David Noble, author of Understanding the Times, who says this: a worldview is the framework from which we view reality and make sense of the world. It's any ideology, philosophy, theology, movement, or religion that provides an overarching approach to understanding God, the world, and man's relationship to God in the world. Yet all that it does is make the unwarranted assumption that God exists in the first place. And that's stupid.
I don't want to seem like I'm questioning his intellect, but I seriously wonder if he's taken any critical thinking class at any university.
Yes, in fact, I have. You clearly haven't, at least not without religion being shoved into it. I am questioning your intellect, or at the very least, your commitment to rationality. You don't seem to understand the problem with these very basic concepts. We understand why, because your brain has been polluted with religious crap since before you could even pretend to reason, to the point that you really don't understand how to reason at all. This is the problem with most theists. They are lacking the most basic information on how to think. They've been indoctrinated into what to think, but how? That's a complete mystery to them. They've got no clue. Logic, whether we like it or not, it's not something that we're inherently born with. It's something that you have to learn, and the religious, because they've had all this religious bullshit shoveled into their heads from an early age, they've never learned it. It's no surprise that Zach here doesn't have a clue. And he's hardly alone.
Because if you do take a critical thinking class, one of the first things you will learn is that everybody has a worldview.
And that doesn't make it a good thing. Now, you can have one, so long as you recognize that it is an inherent limiter to your ability to see reality as it actually is. It imposes limitations on your thinking because it makes unfounded assumptions upon which you learn to rely. The Muslim sees Allah in everything. Why? Because that's their worldview. The Christian sees God in everything. Why? Because that's their worldview. But what happens when God or Allah or the flying spaghetti monster isn't the answer? What do you do then? If you've adopted this worldview uncritically, then you're automatically going to be going down the wrong path because you've artificially hobbled yourself with preconceived notions that do not hold up to critical scrutiny. And that goes through absolutely everything that Zach says in his videos. Pick any of them. They all start with the preconceived notion that God is real. If someone asks him how he knows that, he's got no answer because the very idea that he's wrong, that's utterly beyond his comprehension. Well, of course God is real. It's premise number one in his thinking. He can't reach any other conclusion because that must be true. And when people point out the complete futility of that idea, all he can do is rationalize why he must be right. Because he really wants to be right. He does not understand how to reach logical conclusions. He's too busy carrying a 50-pound sack of religious bullshit around on his back.
This is the basis of critical thinking.
No, it's not. Critical thinking is the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. That's what it is, Zach. I don't know what poison people have been filling your head with, but out here in the real world, you're just wrong. You don't get to just make stuff up because it makes you feel good. You have to deal with what is demonstrable, and newsflash for you, your imaginary friend isn't. Stop making yourself look like a fool.
Or what if you answer the questions of origin, identity, meaning, morality, and destiny?
Done and done? You just don't happen to like the answers that are provided. They conflict with your feelings and your indoctrinated worldview. Therefore, according to you, they just have to be wrong. Well, sorry, but you're the one that's wrong. You don't get to start with God and then only pay attention to things that get you to that conclusion. That's not rational. You don't understand rationality. It's why absolutely nobody outside of your little religious echo chamber agrees with you. And even those people don't seem to agree with you because they're not supporting you in your own comment section. But you don't seem to care about that, do you?
You don't even have to have a definite answer to have a worldview. You can say, when the question is asked, where did you come from? You can say, I don't know, but I don't believe that God did it. That can be part of your worldview.
But you don't have to say that last bit. The answer is, we don't know, full stop. God has nothing at all to do with it, any more than unicorns or leprechauns do. But you're so desperately trying to make it all about you, aren't you? This is all some kind of silly ego trip with you, desperately wanting to believe that you matter. But you don't. Nobody does. In the grand scheme of things, we're all irrelevant. Deal with it. The only reason people came up with gods in the first place was to assuage their own egos and come up with answers that they had no means of achieving at the time. Yet, when we do find those answers, they'd rather pretend that their imaginary friend did it because that's what they polluted their minds with. You done screwed up, son. Fix it.
So that's it, guys. That's all I have for part 4. I hope this helps you understand what's going on with the new atheists when they say certain things about their beliefs or their lack of belief. I'm Zach, this is Adherent Apologetics. I'll see you next time.
Honestly, this isn't getting any better. This is just playing whack-a-mole with particularly pernicious and stupid moles. Every time you stomp on these ridiculous irrational ideas, they just pop up somewhere else. You can't correct the people who don't understand that they need correcting. And that's where all theists go entirely sideways. We tell them that they're being irrational, and they go, no, I'm not. And they make up an entirely new definition of the word so they can pretend otherwise. They are delusional, which by definition means characterized by or holding idiosyncratic beliefs or impressions that are contradicted by reality or rational argument. That's the entire basis of religion. But instead, they just make up new definitions and play musical words to make themselves feel better. And then they deny that they're doing it. I honestly wish stupidity was painful. Then maybe there might not be so many stupid people in the world. But because these idiots invent their own social support system to go along with their irrationality, they thrive. But life isn't fair, is it? Nobody in their right mind thinks that, so I guess we'll all just have to keep suffering while Zach continues to make a complete fool of himself. If nothing else, he's just proving every single one of my points, so I guess there is some value in that. It's a small comfort, but hey, I'll take what I can get.
Boom, dicky, 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 boom.